Hi American Studies, Miss Hammond here. I want to introduce you to something new that we're going to be using in our class. These are called podcasts, and I want to give you this first podcast just as an introduction to what we'll be doing, how you'll access these podcasts, and what my plan is on how we'll use them. So, while you're watching, feel free to think of some questions, and when we get to the end, I'll answer them in class. So, the way that these podcasts work is that the responsibility is mostly on you. Let's talk about some of your responsibilities while watching these podcasts. The first thing is you're going to be asked to watch 2 podcasts per week. These podcasts are very, very short. We'll talk to you about the time, but they will be no longer than 15 minutes. So it'll be a very good use of your time, and it's a good way to get some practice and some new knowledge. While you're watching the podcast, you're also going to be taking some notes that I will give you in a guide. It will ask you questions on there, you'll have opportunities to practice, and then at the end of the week, I will give you opportunities to show me what you learned. So make sure and keep up with your podcasts because your notes and some quizzes will be based on them. So let's talk about some of the due dates. Podcasts are going to be assigned on Tuesdays and Fridays. I know today's Thursday. You are going to have one extra day to work on this very first podcast. After this, they'll be assigned on Tuesdays and Fridays. In addition, notes will be collected and quizzes will be given every Tuesday and Friday. So, for example, you are going to be assigned your very first podcast. Although it's Thursday, like I said, it's going to be due on Tuesday. So you will hand your notes in to me, you'll take a brief quiz, and then I will assign you your second podcast, which will be due. The way that you'll access these podcasts is going to be through YouTube. I want to make this a pretty simple and easy way for you to get information, and so I've put them on YouTube so you can watch them from anywhere. Like always, if you don't have access to a computer, come talk to me. We'll figure it out. We'll get you in the library, we can check out a laptop, you can come to our office in A208, but we will figure out a way to get you access to that podcast. I know that some people are already having a panic attack, and I totally get it. This is completely new to me, completely new to you, and I assume that you have some questions. So let me give some of the details here, and we'll come back to some of the questions at the end. I know some people are thinking, what the heck is a podcast? It sounds like some kind of weird vegetable growing out of the ground. A podcast is kind of like a radio show. You listen to it, you get some information, you get to gel on it. But the cool thing about a podcast is that there's visuals to help you understand better, and you can watch these podcasts on YouTube anytime you want. So, for example, if there's a concept that's very difficult for you to get your head around, you can watch it an infinite number of times. You can listen to it whenever you want. Go on there, get some practice, maybe review for a test. Use that information in a paper or a project. These podcasts are designed especially for our American Studies class. So they are tailored to your needs. I will evaluate every single week what we are understanding and what we are not understanding, and then I will use these podcasts to review that information. So I know people are concerned about finding the podcasts. Here is how it works. You can access our wiki, which will have a link to all of the class podcasts. I will also be making better use of the wiki. I know I've been a total slacker. We set it up at the beginning of the year and didn't come back to it. So I know that we need to use it more, and you guys will probably need some practice getting to it. Aside from the wiki, I'm also going to include the URL to each podcast in your note-taking guide. In addition to that, you will be able to simply go into YouTube and search for my name and our podcast number, which will come up under the videos that I have posted. So This is not supposed to be some kind of a difficult task. It's actually supposed to make your learning easier. So, if anybody's panicking, wait till the end and we'll come back to your questions. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why I chose podcasts as a good way to teach you new information. The reality is that some information is just better presented online. Think back to a situation where you were in class and the teacher was lecturing. Maybe it's me, maybe Miss Bradley, a different teacher. Think about a time when you were bored. I know that in our class, sometimes people are laying their heads down and I'm wondering, are you guys learning? Are you engaged? Are you just tired? Are you hungry? What's going on? But think of a time when you were bored. The cool thing about podcasts is that it allows you to get this information quickly and easily. It's a simple way to get that information rather than having to sit through a long class. The cool thing about YouTube videos is they can't be longer than 15 minutes, so you have a guarantee that I'm not going to be sitting there yammering on and putting you to sleep because I do have a time limit. That makes my usage of time very, very efficient. I want you to also think back to a time when a teacher was lecturing or trying to present material and you got really confused. I think this happens to everyone sometimes. We don't understand what's going on, but the teacher's talking and you can't necessarily just put up a hand and ask the question right then. The cool thing about a podcast is that you can review that information as many times as you need to. If you need to watch that video 100 times in order to get the material, you can do that. If you get it on the first try, that's great. It makes the information more accessible, though, to people who are struggling. Another cool thing about podcasts is that every time you can go back and practice. You'll be seeing that similar material. So I think that they will be very useful for both the people who are advanced in some skills and the people who get a bit confused. Another part of this decision is that podcasts give Miss Bradley and I a chance to see you practice and watch your learning style. I want to give you a little comparison between the traditional classroom lesson and the podcast or the online lesson. So first, let's talk a little bit about the style of learning that is typically in a traditional classroom lesson. I know this doesn't happen every day, but let's do a little comparing. So typically, a teacher standing up front, lecturing for long periods of time, you're taking notes, or you're getting bored and thinking about something else. The cool thing about a podcast lesson is that it's a good use of your time. You get a lesson and an example in 15 minutes, and the cool thing is you can either leave it behind or you can stay there and do some more practice. Another difference is that practice in a traditional classroom setting is saved for later in the day. So that means we teach you what you need to know, we fill up your head, then you go home and you practice all by yourself. But what happens when that practice goes wrong? Who do you ask for help? Your teacher isn't there, your friends and your they're not there. So what do? The cool thing about an online lesson is that the practice happens in the classroom. And if you get confused, your teacher's there to help you. I can work with you on some of those process issues. Maybe you don't know how to correct a sentence if we're doing sentence diagramming. But if I see you learning it, I have a greater chance of understanding what went wrong and what's confusing you. It gives me more hands-on time to watch you learn. The other thing is, we have no idea how you study. This is all done outside of school. So we have no idea if your methods are effective or how we can make them better. The cool thing with podcasts is when you come in and study in class and you're learning concepts, again, we can practice with you and see where you're at. The last reason why I picked podcasts is that most public school students, and that's the people in this class, you're eventually going to have to take an online class. That's just a reality. A majority of public school students have to take an online class at some point. That could be in high school or later in college. Even people who aren't interested in going on to college, they need to learn how to use these podcasts as well. They're used in training and retail, so that's stores, the military, and religious organizations. So it's important that everyone knows how to use these no matter what their future holds. One example is Target. The store Target does a lot of its training online in podcast videos. If you don't know how to use that when you go get a job, it might make that training more difficult. The other thing is that online classes use these kinds of podcasts to get information to you. I'm doing my master's degree online right now, and I totally understand that it's much better to practice this stuff right now rather than when your grade depends on it or you're trying to earn a living by watching these podcasts. So make sure and get all this practice out of the way now with Miss Hammond rather than some high stakes event later. So let's talk about what this means for you. I want to get started on podcasts right away. I'm going to assign you your first podcast. You'll need to go onto YouTube and actually watch this video. It'll be a PowerPoint typically with some visuals or video clips in it, and I'll usually be giving you a little lesson. The first podcast that you will watch is going to be on tone and the level of formality in your writing. This is because we need to tackle grammar, we need to tackle vocabulary, we need to tackle other elements of writing. But until we really understand what tone and formality are, none of those things are even going to be useful for us. So, on Tuesday, your first podcast will be due. You will need to have your notes completed, and you'll come in and take a little quiz so that I can make sure that you've learned what you needed to learn. The most important part is actually being engaged in the podcast. It's really easy when a screen is on your computer and there's images flying by to just sit back and let your brain kind of relax. My goal for this is that you're actively thinking, that you're doing some activities and taking notes and going back and reviewing, because this is supposed to be the best use of your time. If you're zoning out or playing games on your phone or texting while this is going on, that's just like if you're ignoring time in class. So use this time efficiently and use it to your advantage. I look forward to all of the things that we get to learn and all the fun stuff we'll get to do in class, because you're going to get your learning done at home and come into class and practice and work with your pods. All right, let's chat. Any questions?